Oi!
Nigel Farage, it's a pleasure to have you back here with Real Vision.
Exciting times.
What you've accomplished this year, and we sat down in the spring, blow by blow, you've called this thing pretty accurately. I was at an event where you did a speech in the U.S. I noticed you've been working with some of the financial institutions. You do a great speaker. You know, as a public speaker, I remember this year and even back to last year, you were talking about Theresa May not making it through the May plan.
Well, I think I helped to get rid of her, actually.
It wasn't a loaded gun, I hope. But God bless her. I mean, she had an incredible spirit, and you know, she was inspiring to most of us around the world just watching what she went through. But at the end of the day...
Well, you say that.
Yeah.
Look, what is Brexit? What is Brexit?
What is Brexit?
What do people want from Brexit? Now, you know, I'm the godfather of this, so I think I've got a reasonable idea. And the point about Brexit is to break free. It's about political independence. It's about being a self-governing nation where your laws are made by your own representatives in Parliament and where the highest court in the land at times is called into a judge. And what we've seen now, you know, 3.25 years since the Brexit vote, is an attempt by the political class to redefine Brexit as somehow Brexit is staying part of the customs union or staying part of the single market, and it is not. And here's Mrs. May's problem. I think she went into this as a Remainer, but as a Democrat.
I see.
Saying, right, I'm going to do the best job I can. She gave a big speech at Lancaster House where she said all the right things.
And then, that for the audience, that was about...
Lancaster House was in early 17.
Early 17.
She gave a big speech, and I thought, gosh, here's a British Prime Minister saying things, using words and phrases for which I've been condemned consistently for the last 20 years, and this is now mainstream. And then within a few months, I think the civil service had got hold of her. And suddenly, rather than Brexit being a clean break, it became a close and special partnership. And really, ever since that time, Brexit's been confused, and there is an attempt to redefine those that want a clean break as somehow being the extremists. Public opinion does not suggest that. So I think Mrs. May started off with good intentions. She then went wrong. And the longer this has gone on, the more empowered the Liberal Democrats have felt in Britain, even the Labour Party, which have gone from promising to deliver Brexit to now wanting to have a second referendum. So the longer that time has gone on, the more that Parliament, the more that London has tried effectively to begin by watering it down. And now it's an outright, blatant attempt by Parliament to stop it from happening. That's where we are.
To undo the will of the people.
Yeah, and they say things like people didn't know what they were voting for, as if we're all sort of, you know, knuckle-dragging skinheads, you know, and they somehow know better. It's the sense of moral superiority that many of the Remainers have. They say that we know more now than we did then, and I think they really do think that somehow we've changed our minds. Actually, the real hard evidence is about this. Remain, right now, is about 35%. All right? Leaving with a clean break Brexit, which is just goodbye. You can whistle Dixie for your 39 billion. We've just had enough of all of this, let alone be insulted by the Luxembourg Prime Minister. I'll come back to that. It's about 35%. And there are 17%, between 15 and 20%, who think, yeah, we must leave, but keeping a reasonable form of economic relationship might be the easiest way. So if you look at it, leave significantly has a lead over Remain, far bigger than it did 3.5 years ago. And if you then give people a binary choice, you know, up against the wall,
yeah,
you know, October 31st in a couple of weeks' time, is it leave with no deal, as they phrase it, or is it extend and have a second referendum? Then leave's got a big majority. So we're in this very, very strange world where, in many ways, public opinion towards Brexit has hardened. More people than ever want to.
Which explains the rise of your Brexit party.
Well, and that's why a brand new party, the Brexit Party, could just, appear. I sort of pulled the lid off, like a jack in the box, just appeared and reached the top of the party. I mean, it was topping the polls in this country within 2 weeks. And this is normally a country.
And the seats in the European Parliament relative to how many seats in the European
Well,
Parliament?
we won 29 of the seats
29.
in the European Parliament, and we got more than 50% more votes than our nearest rivals. I mean, it was a dramatic victory, but it kind of showed the disconnect between Parliament and people. Boris took over. I mean, many would argue this, that without the Brexit Party being formed, Theresa May could have limped on a bit longer. Without the Brexit Party, Boris probably wouldn't have become leader, because what the Brexit Party did was to reset the agenda. To say, look, we've heard all this rubbish. This is what the vote was about. This is what we want. Boris finds himself in a very, very tight spot. He's got this parliament that is majority Remain. He's also, I think, made a catastrophic mistake, and that is to call what we call a Queen's speech. You would call it a State of the Union speech in America. Once a year, setting out the legislative programme for the coming year. We normally have Queen's speeches every single year. We've not had one for a few years. In fact, this has been the longest time without a King or Queen's speech since the English Civil War. So, of itself...
And this speech is coming up?
October 14th.
October 14th.
Now, this
so
speech
inside of a month from
now.
now.
I mean, this speech of itself is not unusual, but the timing of it, with the Brexit deadline of the 31st of October, and the consequence of it, meaning that Parliament is now closing for a few days, as we run down to that, has been a catastrophic error. Because what it's done, it's united Remainers in their most amazing way. It's led to this extraordinary case going on in our own Supreme Court as to has the government acted lawfully? Did Boris lie to the Queen? Extraordinary things that are going on at the moment. And I think that was a major, major error that Boris made.
And he was thinking, doing this and calling it, I wouldn't call it a timeout, but in putting Parliament in the box.
Proroguing is the word.
By doing that, he thought he would have the bandwidth to negotiate with the Macrons or the Brussels, France, Brussels, Germany, without interference that the Miss May dealt with. That's what he was thinking.
But actually, all he's done is just unite Remain.
Yeah.
And it's been a mistake. Now, what I can tell you is this. I was sitting in the European Parliament yesterday. I exchanged the usual pleasantries with Mr. Juncker and Mr. Barnier, as I always do. And I sat through a near 4-hour debate in that chamber yesterday morning. And there is a big change of tone coming from Brussels.
That's what I want to ask you. So this is important because our audience is a financial audience.
Yeah.
The Bear Traps report, services like ours focus on political risk for the markets. And in talking to our clients around the world, there's a couple of, not assumptions, but things that people have been working and pricing in their mind. Number one, you've had almost 4 years now since the original Brexit vote, almost, it'll be next year, and that a lot's been priced in terms of banks leaving, and a lot of the dark scenario has not turned up. And the financial GDP, in some respects, is even stronger in the UK PMIs than they are in Germany. The question is from clients that I've spoken to this morning is, since Miss May dealt with this a year ago in December, had that famous, right on the Parliament floor where she had held things together, the clients around the world think that this German zoo, which is business confidence, down 15, 20% over the last year, PMIs, negative yielding bonds on the planet Earth a year ago when Miss May were 12, maybe 10 trillion. Now we're up to 17. So the the economic pressure on Germany, France, Brussels to really work with you, I think is changed.
They're scared. I mean, look.
So you have a stronger hand.
Here it is. Boris gets the job, and he inherits the withdrawal agreement, the new European treaty, all right? It's been rejected 3 times by Parliament. Why? Well, there are lots of reasons, but the main one is the so-called Irish backstop, which is virtually an attempt to annex part of the United Kingdom. It's just not acceptable.
That's the Irish backstop.
The Irish backstop. Boris says they change the Irish backstop or we just leave with no deal.
Brussels.
They've got to change that backstop or we will leave on October the 31st with no deal. The markets took the talk of leaving with no deal and the short-term uncertainty that would create, and they kind of believed it. The Jeremy Corbyn message, the Lib Dem message is panic. We're about to leave with no deal. It is rubbish. Boris is not going to leave with no deal, all right? He just isn't going to do it because his own Conservative Party, his own parliamentary Conservative Party, just won't wear it. It isn't going to happen. So, back in July, when Boris first became the Prime Minister and talked about changes to the backstop, it was all Mr. Tough Guy from Juncker and Barnier, not a dot or comma, we're not changing a thing. I sat and listened to every word of that yesterday and spoke to them face to face. And one of my colleagues, former stockbroker guy, had a private meeting with Barnier yesterday. They are now scared. They are scared because the European economy is turning down. Things are not pretty. And we are a mega export market for them. I mean, they trade with us. The surplus, the annual surplus on trade between the EU and the UK is over 100 billion euros. We drink an awful lot of their wine. We buy a lot of their cars. I mean, great statistic. 110 million bottles of Italian Prosecco are sold in the UK every year.
110 million
bottles. It's extraordinary. So they're now getting quite worried. Could Johnson, is Johnson bluffing? Could Johnson? They are now much keener to assuage Boris Johnson. So yesterday, Juncker said, the backstop is not for me an article of faith, all right, provided we get the protections that are needed. And the protections are that the UK would not go rogue and start selling goods into the European Union that were substandard. The protections are no emergence of what's called a hard border between Northern Ireland and the Republic because of the historical 30 years of troubles and all the rest of it. And I think this is what will happen.
We get an election this year?
There is a major European summit on the 17th, 18th of October.
So the Queen's speech.
Queen's speech on the 14th, he lays out his governmental programme, which will partly be Brexit, but also it'll be other domestic stuff as well. But the summit's key.
EU summit.
The EU summit's key. And I think it is now a strong probability that Boris will come back on the 18th of October.
With something in his back pocket.
Waving a piece of paper, as British Prime Ministers often do when they come back from negotiations in Europe, often wrongly. And he'll say, look, we've got a deal. We've got a deal, the backstop's not there, and then try and ram it through Parliament. If he can't do that, then there will be a further extension. All right? So all of these big downside risks, short-term risks to the UK, the pound, etc., I think they are melting away. And I think...
Yeah, so when we spoke earlier in the year, you were bearish on the pound, now you're more...
Not anymore. No, I'm not anymore. I think to me, we're somewhere near the bottom of a long historical downturn.
Walk us through the Corbyn risk.
So, that's scenario one. Scenario one is, and that will happen.
Yeah.
Now, he could come back with nothing, but it's either, with Boris, it's either he gets an amended withdrawal agreement passed in Parliament, and we leave on the 31st of October, but we leave it on what would be called, listen, politically, I'd say, what's the point? Because we'd still be so tied to all of it, but it would be from the market's short-term perspective, it'd be a soft Brexit, or we have an extension of a further, who's to say, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, I don't know. I just do not think the no-deal clean break is going to happen on the 31st of October. All right? Just don't believe it will. The other scenario is that Labour, who have been through this extraordinary transformation from being a party that said they were for Brexit at the general election, are now almost wholly Remain and second referendum. But they've played a very clever game because Boris tried to call a general election. They stopped him having a general election because they know that if we haven't left on the 31st of October, that Boris's ratings will be down because he's promised everybody.
Yes.
So here's the big thing. The big thing is, will Boris's Queen's speech get voted down? Will Labour lead the charge?
Is that a no confidence?
Well, it would then turn into a no confidence situation. So it could be that we get a general election sometime late November, early December. That's possible. It's also possible that they'll try and bring Boris down anyway. And we've got this new piece of legislation. It's called the Fixed Term Parliaments Act, and no one quite knows what it is.
Fixed Term Parliaments Act.
Yeah, passed in 2010 by Cameron. Dreadful piece of law, like most things he did. It is possible that they vote against the Queen's speech, and at the end of 2 weeks, rather than there being a general election, if Corbyn can get a majority, he could become a caretaker prime minister. Now, the markets...
And that's a 31-day caretaker situation?
It would be... Well, who's to say how long it would be? But it would clearly be quite short term. So there is a possibility of a Corbyn caretaker government. That risk is there, but it wouldn't be a huge risk because he couldn't do any of the things that he would like. I mean, we know what he wants to do, which is tax the rich out of existence. All right? Completely change corporate law in Britain, the sort of Marxist model, of workers' councils on the board. And
any empty property in London he wants to fill it.
Oh, yeah, and private companies having to give 10% of their equity away. It really...
Bank nationalisation.
And nationalisation. It's real Marxist stuff. But, again, even if he forms a caretaker government, it will be very, very short term. All right? So I don't think that in terms of the way the markets are viewing all of this, there may be significant political turmoil. It might be difficult to predict exactly where this is going to go. But all of the scenarios at some point lead to a general election. And a general election in which Corbyn cannot get a majority, he's in real trouble.
So if Boris teams up with your party...
Well, here's the deal. Now, President Trump sees this more clearly than most because he's a numbers man. But if there was an electoral alliance between Boris and myself, he would win a big majority. He'd win a big majority. The threat of Marxist Corbyn would be gone, and he'd be able to get Brexit done. But, I've put a very big offer on the table. But what I won't accept politically is anything based around this withdrawal agreement, because frankly, even without the backstop, it leaves us basically trapped inside the European Union's customs union. And look, here's the point, and this point does not get made enough. The received wisdom from the research departments of JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, and Deutsche Bank has been that Brexit will be terrible for the British economy. The truth of it is actually cutting free of the customs union, becoming competitive, would be phenomenal for the United
so much
Kingdom.
capital's already left.
Well, but the opportunity here is amazing. The other big observation yesterday was, despite all the conciliatory talk that we got from Barnier and Juncker, Barnier did say at the end that in the longer term, we will, post-Brexit, seek a trade relationship based with the United Kingdom, and it will be around the customs union. They do not want us breaking out of this, because this is the chance, even if there are short-term bumps in the road, this is the chance for the UK economy to start to become globally competitive, but much more competitive than its European neighbours. And I see Brexit a bit like the 1979 moment, when you go from a very, very heavily state-run economy, which is what Britain had in the 70s, and you start freeing things up.
With some certainty. Once you give the market certainty, right? You've had 4 years of uncertainty.
Yeah, political certainty and a clear direction of travel.
A fiscal plan.
Yep.
So this is what could happen over the next 6 months. You could deliver, you and Boris potentially could deliver certainty, a fiscal plan, which I've heard is anywhere from $20 to $50 billion fiscal stimulus.
Well, the important thing for us, given our geography next door to Europe, given our economic interlinkage with Europe, I feel that the Eurozone is going into some sort of slow, gentle, downward deflationary spiral. That's how it looks, how it feels. That's what negative rates and all these markers tell me. So it's really important for us actually not to be dragged down with it. And yes, stimulus is one of the things we can do, absolutely.
And your relationship with President Trump, that might be a nice card in the back pocket for Boris, because if you can do, at the same time you do a fiscal plan, if you can do a trade deal with the U.S., what can you tell us about that in terms?
Well, look, I think, clearly there are, all trade deals are contentious and all trade deals can take a long time. And they generally take a long time because there are chapters of the negotiation that everyone gets stuck on. Agriculture nearly always being, despite being a small part of the economy, agriculture nearly always being the blocker.
Gets the headlines.
Yeah, and there are some big cultural differences. There are some big GM differences. There are some big meat rearing differences between us and the US. But the cleverest plan, I thought, on this, and he's gone now, but it was John Bolton. John Bolton proposed a Swiss solution. So the Swiss negotiate trade deals with the EU, for example, on a sectoral basis. 16 separate sectoral deals. And if we left on the 31st of October.
That means sectoral based on industries?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely.
So your automotive sector.
Yeah, and the financial sector, and et cetera.
Each sector does a deal.
Yeah. And that was Bolton's idea, and a really positive way of doing that. I mean, basically, if we did leave on the 31st of October, I'm not sure we will, but if we did leave on the 31st of October, if we left cleanly on the 31st of October, with what's called a no deal, we could by Christmas have signed up with the USA some sectoral deals. Pretty obvious, isn't it? We're selling Jaguar motor cars and we're buying Levi's jeans or Harley Davidsons,
And that accelerates the economic activity.
Absolutely.
And certainty.
Absolutely. But here's the thing, and I do want an American audience politically to understand this. If the withdrawal agreement goes through, we will be stuck in a transition period, which means effectively nothing will change. And that transition period is due to last 15 months, but is extendable for a further 2 years. And we would not, during that transition period, be able to sign any trade deals with anybody.
Purgatory.
All right? And this is why, to me, the clean break is the only way forward, because it leaves us free to get on and start to do things. And all right, there might be some short-term, all change. Moving house brings difficulty. Changing relationships brings even bigger difficulty. All change in life brings difficulty. But my fear is that my political fear is that Boris gets this withdrawal agreement through Parliament with this amendment to the backstop, and then we're still stuck in limbo for years.
And what you're saying essentially is that over the last 3 years, the risk-reward of leaving has improved. In other words, your upside of leaving versus, say, an immediate hard Brexit, your risk has been somewhat reduced and your upside has improved because of these potential, either a fiscal stimulus and a trade deal. And counter to that, by staying, you're down, the risk-reward's gone worse. Like, in other words...
I think it has,
yeah.
And I do. And I think one of the problems here now, one thing that is certainly, employment's at record levels. We're doing relatively well compared to our European neighbours economically, but investment is slowing to a standstill. And I think investment wants a political decision to get finally made and for us to move on. And my fear with the withdrawal agreement is it would leave us stuck in that limbo for many more years to come. And that's why I am trying to say to Boris, look, you're going down the wrong direction. Go for the clean break. Work with me. We'll achieve it. And you know what? If with a clean break, the pound fell a few cents on day one and day two, just buy it.
A thesis that we have at the Bear Traps report, and I'm hearing more and more around the world from clients, we've done so many years of central banks dealing with political uncertainty, and more and more pressure is on the central banks, the Bank of England, the ECB, the Fed. At the end of the day, a fiscal stimulus plan out of Europe, the probability of that is rising from countries like the Netherlands, even Germany now. What do you think about central banks? 'Cause I always want to ask you, central banks and how much pressure has been on them, and are we coming to a point where, because of the populist movement and some of the things, the engines that you've created, could we create an impetus for more fiscal policy coming from the Eurozone?
Well, I mean, this is interesting, isn't it? Because, the Bank of England, for example, in this country, when I was younger, did the bidding of the government. Simple as that. They were declared independent in the 1990s, but now what we see right across the West, particularly in America, is almost like political warfare going on between governments and central banks over who should do what. And it's a big question, isn't it? Should central banks act independently of government, or should central banks act effectively as an arm of elected government?
The MMT, modern monetary theory.
And it's a very interesting debate. Being the radical that I am, and believing that democracy ultimately should prevail, and that we should succeed or fail on our electoral judgments, I am minded to think that actually independent central banks have got a very limited future, that this friction that now exists between governments and central banks can't go on. I don't see how you can have a president and a Fed at war with each other constantly. It's just not working, The difficulty, of course, the downside of the argument, of course, is that a lot of decisions you make in terms of fiscal policy or monetary policy don't impact immediately. They impact and kick in 18 months, 2 years down the road, and that's the downside of it. But I do think that this separation of function of the two is coming under pressure.
So but net, do the politicians respond with more fiscal? In other words, fiscal spending, deficit spending?
Yeah, they will. It's all they understand. And right at the moment, faced with an economic downturn, they feel
we've had austerity
I know.
And for years with the Greeks, even the UK, throughout Europe, have had such austerity. But
no, we're about to, and with interest rates where they are and everything else.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, you've got essentially free money to play with here.
So you may as well you may as well do what you can to stop a downward deflationary spiral. I just feel in Europe, even doing that, I think some of the longer term problems are very, very serious. I think Germany's reliance on the motor car as we head towards electric motor cars.
that German economy. Autos and auto parts.
Yeah, massive. And to be fair, they've been jolly good at it. But, electric cars, it's all about
There's
the battery.
some secular massive changes.
You've also got, the driverless car, perhaps not terribly far away. The EU resisting driverless cars, by the way, as much as they can, for obvious reasons. And the cultural thing. Kids don't buy cars anymore. I mean, we used to buy cars, Larry. So one of the things we wanted to do. But kids don't buy cars, and kids live a much more urban lifestyle than ever before. So there are some longer term cultural problems, I think, that Germany's got. And, Italy, you just look at Italian industry, Italian infrastructure. It's not been invested in for a very, very long time. It just falls further and further behind its competition with every year that goes by. And France, still suffering from too much state in the economy, repressive labour laws. Whatever the ECB decides to do with stimulus, I don't think the outlook for the Eurozone is rosy at all.
So we get a hard Brexit within 6 months and an election? I guess
I don't know.
Probability of...
I'm saying to you there could be a so-called hard Brexit, but it's entirely in David Cameron's hands. He couldn't do it on his own.
Boris.
Sorry, I apologise. I say it's the week of Cameron's memoirs. I've got him on the brain. It's because of the nasty things he said about me.
What do you say? The land of the unemployed?
Yeah. No, I mean, it's Boris's choice. And you know, if Boris decides to do a deal with me, and at some point we had an election and worked together, we would get, some call it hard Brexit, I call it clean Brexit, but I think longer term, it would give us certitude, and I believe huge opportunity.
Well, it's been a pleasure to have you.
Thank you.
To watch your career from to almost 15, 20 years ago. You were alone in the European Parliament, a lone man.
Very.
And now there are thousands and thousands behind you as I see you walk through the streets of London. It feels like every year you just have a little bit more energy and more people that have taken.
Yeah, I mean, I've led to, what I've done has led to an outbreak of this disease right across Europe. It's called democracy.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Good to see you, my friend.